Okay, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the Institute of Classical Studies. For those of you who don't know me, and I imagine that's several of you here, I'm Catherine Tempest and I'm the acting director of the Institute in which we're meeting. And this is also the Institute which was delighted to receive the application of Professor Jussi Gadaletta, who applied for one of our prestigious fellowships and was unanimously awarded it for such an exciting project, continuing the work of Trendle, who left the request to appoint fellows every year on a topic of interest. But because it also brought into dialogue work that the ICS had already been doing with the British Museum, and also brought to the ICS a topic of incredible interest and not something we'd heard about recently. So I'm personally delighted as well to be able to sit in and listen to some of this today. So the housekeeping necessities always fall on the person that speaks first, and that is simply to say that if the fire alarm goes off, then we should treat it seriously, and that you should make your way as quickly as possible through the doors through which you entered and back down the stairs. And likewise, if you need the facilities, then you go back into the main lobby and you'll find toilets on both sides there. That isn't a very academic start to the event, so I will be passing over to people that know much more about the wondrous vases that we're going to be looking at today. But this is really just to extend a very warm welcome both to Jussi and to everyone here today, and to say how delighted we are to be hosting it. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you. Beautiful.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to open this workshop and welcome colleagues, students, curators, and specialists whose work engages from different perspectives with ancient material culture, with color, with memory, and museums. I would like warmly to thank the Institute of Classical Studies for hosting and supporting this project through the Trendle Fellowship. And I'm deeply grateful to Professor Catherine Arlo and Professor Catherine Tempest for their support, and to Katie Baldwin, who is speaking, for the excellent organization of this event and for her constant assistance throughout my stay. It is a privilege to develop this research within an institution that continues to foster international dialogue on the ancient Mediterranean, while honoring the legacy of Sir Arthur Dale Trumbull. And my sincere thanks also go to the British Museum and the Department of Greece and Rome. The opportunity to study Canosan materials on display, but also objects in storage and archival records, has been essential to this research. I would like to thank Tom Harrison, David Saunders, Alex Trascott, Sadie Brown, and Jackie Lau for their generosity and support in facilitating access to the collections and contributing to this event. And above all, I would like to thank Christian Mazet, with whom I first conceived this project, even before submitting my application. His intellectual generosity and constant engagement have been fundamental in shaping both my research and this workshop. It is a true pleasure to share this journey with you, Christian. Now, the project at the origin of this workshop focuses on Canosa Puglia between 4th and 3rd century BCE, a period of artistic experimentation. Canosa is renowned for its extraordinary so-called polychrome and plastic vases. Terracotta creations whose vivid colors and sculptural forms have fascinated scholars since the 19th century. Yet these objects are far more than isolated masterpieces. My research seeks to reintegrate them into the broader funerary and visual systems to which they belong. What we often treat as separate categories, figure pottery, local ceramics, tomb decorations, ornaments, were in fact interconnected elements of assemblages expressing identity, memory, and status during a period of profound transformation in Apulia. This perspective also invites us to rethink the interaction between the local traditions and external influences, which generated a true mix and match phenomenon. This is the title of my project, Mix and Match. Local forms were enriched by Greek visual language, and Daunian and Apulian refigured pottery gradually transformed into the highly distinctive polychrome and plastic production that define Canosan. And the British Museum collection offers a particularly rich case study, especially because many objects entered the museum in the 19th century without secure archaeological context data. This raises key questions. How do we reconstruct fragmented object biographies? How can archives, science, and archaeology restore meaning to discarded materials? And how can museums rethink their narrative story today? These workshops emerge from such questions. It is conceived as a space of dialogue between archaeology, museum practice, scientific research, and heritage institutions, as well as between Italy and the United Kingdom. In this sense, it reflects one of the fellowship's central aims, strengthening international collaboration and rethinking how archaeological heritage is understood, shared, and reactivated across communities. And I would like to warmly thank all the other institutions supporting this initiative. The Castello Svevo di Bari, Direzione Regionale Musei Nazionali Puglia, the Scuola di Specializzazione Interateneo in Beni Archeologici of the University of Bari di Foggia, and the Fondazione Archeologica Canosan.
Long names.
An especially important aspect of this project concerns younger scholars. Today we will hear from students and early career researchers working directly on Canosan material in close collaboration with local institutions. Their work reminds us that archaeology is also about continuity and shared responsibility in the present. This is a particularly vibrant moment for Canosan studies. Yes, my with renewed attention across museums and research projects to the interpretation and display of this extraordinary material culture. We will hear from colleagues such as Anita Rocco and Luca Mercuri on new approaches to display and interpretation, while the work of absent colleagues, including Raffaella Cassano and Anita Guarnieri, will remain an important reference for our discussion. And in this respect, I'm also pleased to announce that the proceedings of this workshop will be published in the series of the School of Specialization directed by Professor Riccardo Di Cesare, who is late, but he will come later, allowing the ideas shared here to continue beyond these 2 days. Over the next sessions, we will move between pottery, painting, restoration, science, fieldwork, and museum studies, culminating tomorrow in direct engagement with the British Museum collections and science laboratories. This workshop is about reconnecting what has long been separated: objects and contexts, color and meaning, museums and excavation histories, and perhaps even communities and their material past. That would be hardly be a better way to begin than returning to Canosan materials, preserved here in London, and the history they still carry. It is therefore a great pleasure for me to invite Christian Mazet to join me in this introduction and opening the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie. First of all, I would also like to thank all the institutions and individuals who made this workshop possible, and in particular on the British side, the ICS and the British Museum, and especially Catherine Tempest and Tom Harrison, keeper in Greece and Rome, who has supported this initiative from the very beginning. Thank you as well to all the participants here for accepting our invitation, and above all, thank you to Josie, and I hope this workshop will reflect the passionate and productive collaboration we have shared over the past months, and the funny collaboration too. I will keep this brief. Yes, if you can, thank you. I will keep this brief as the dense afternoon of speech is awaiting for us. To introduce our workshop, I wanted to begin with the long reception history of Canosan objects in Britain. If you go to South Kensington and visit the Victoria and Albert Museum, you will see in room 107 a huge Victorian fresco painted in 1886 by Lord Frederick Leighton, entitled The Art of Industry as Applied to Peace, which sought to depict the importance of the industrial arts and their trade within an ancient setting. With another fresco, The Art of Industry as Applied to War, it has been commissioned for the South Court of the former South Kensington Museum, which was then the centerpiece of the building. And if you look at it carefully, as a good art historian we all are, you will notice, as Ian Jenkins did, that in the right-hand corner, 3 Canosan vases are there, which at that time were on display in the terracotta room of the British Museum's Greek and Roman galleries. We can identify vases from the Temple and Castellani collections. This tells us a great deal about the impact of this original Canosan material culture within the tastes and antiquarian aesthetics of Victorian London. At the very same moment, when on the other side of the channel, I'm French, so I need to talk about the roots, Canosan vases were also being prominently displayed at the center of the Greek antiquities galleries of the Louvre, having entered the museum through the acquisition of the famous Campana collection. They would later inspire artists such as Rodin, who at the end of the 19th century encountered them and drew inspiration from them in his artistic practice of assembling ancient vases from his own collection together with his plaster figures. I show you one example here. There are several. What always struck artists and visitors, both in London and Paris, was the Baroque, composite, and highly crafted quality of Canosan vases, which stood apart from the canons of classical antiquity, as well as their rich polychromy. We can say that these peculiar vases surprised and unsettled expectation. In French, it sounds better. It's true. Because we can say that il détonne et étonne, because there's a right. And they still do today for our visitors. Exactly. At the British Museum, there was a renewed interest in Canosan objects, especially from the 1960s onwards. First with the remarkable glassware from the site, studied in 1968 by Arden. Then with the red figure pottery through the research of Trendon, of course, and subsequently through the extensive work undertaken in the 80s and 90s for the creation of the current first rows galleries. Particular mentions must be made of the creation of the fundamental study published in 1986 by Frederick van der Wiel and von Ommeren, vases with polychrome and plastic decoration from Canosa, produced in the context of the important conference organized by my predecessor, Judith Fordling, about the Italian Iron Age artifacts in the British Museum. It's a huge, huge book, and there's a great contribution on Canosan vases in it. Yet, since this major publication, relatively little has been done, even though discoveries at the site in Italy have been renewed and research into the history of archaeology and Canosan productions has developed enormously, thanks to the work developed by Raffaella Castano and her team and other Italian scholars. Since then, the objects from Canosa have been dispersed. I don't have another. Okay, great. It was another slide, but that's okay. Since then, the objects from Canosa have been dispersed throughout the museums, between the Hellenistic gallery on the ground floor, which notably displays the glass and faience from the site, and the display cases on the first floor devoted to Italy before Rome and the Western Greeks, which house the rest of the Canosan collection. This fragmentation has probably not encouraged a comprehensive study of research of our own collection. And another millstone that you can just this one. Another millstone has been the study developed by our colleague Johan Dyer, color scientist at the Department of Scientific Research in the British Museum, who only recently left the museum and whom we warmly acknowledge, as Juicy and I had originally planned to organize this workshop with her. Joan carried out a pioneering research published in 2018 on the polychromy of one of our composite Canosan head vase, or unokoe, but we prefer to name it exactly, focusing in particular on the analysis of the purple pigment, which was created through a mixture of Egyptian, as she has presented, a mixture of Egyptian blue and red lake containing madder, cochineal, and one of the earliest known examples of lake dye in classical antiquity, probably extracted from dyed textiles in lake pigment. These results open up another dimension to the economic history of Canosan production during the Hellenistic period. And Juicy will have the opportunity also to discuss this further. More generally, our understanding of techniques and the use of polychromy in classical archaeology has been profoundly transformed lately, and notably through the collective efforts of various research teams. And one should mention, in particular, the Paris team, bringing together the Louvre and the CDRMF, le Centre de Restauration des Musées de France, with the work carried out by our colleagues Violaine Jamet and Brigitte Bourgeois on the polychromy of Greek terracottas, a major publication on which has appeared very recently, by the beginning of this month. Also a huge book. Violaine is also known for in the Canosan studies field for her important typological and technical work about the monas of Canosa, les pleureuses. It is around these themes. I did a mistake. This was the previous slide with the dispersion of the Canosan collection inside the museum, but tomorrow you will be able to see it more directly. So you have the room 22 with the faience and glass collection related to the Hellenistic period. The room 71, where you have this wall of the Italic peoples, where part of the Canosan vases are presented. And after Cyprus, the room of Western Greek. No comment. The room of Western Greek in Italy. Cyprus between the two. The room of Western Greeks, where you have one big display case with the Canosan findings and another display case in the Smirk display case of 19th century display cases with another part of the Canosan material. So mainly it is around these themes, approaching in turn production, archaeometry, the history of archaeology, collections, and restoration, the history of restoration too, while also allowing for excursions into other geographical areas such as Campania, Basilicata, or Greece, and even into other fields of what we can name the art of color, such as glassware. But we have built the program of this workshop. We will enter directly into the heart of the subject today with the first session devoted to pottery and painting. Giusy will begin by focusing on the funerary polychrome art of Canosan, after which the case of Harpy will be presented by Marcella Leone, although she is not present with us today, but I will read a contribution on her behalf. She sent us a contribution this morning, so we will read it. And we will then take a comparative step aside, thanks to the research conducted by our colleague from York, Maureen Carroll and companion. The second session will be devoted to questions of restoration, forgery and color science, through presentations by Hortense de Corneillon and Enrica Raponi. And finally, we will conclude our first afternoon with ongoing research on canosa being carried out at the University of Bari and Foggia, where we'll have the pleasure of hearing from Riccardo Di Cesare, so maybe later in the afternoon, because we still have to, right? As well as Linda Capraro and Caprioli. Why did I say Capraro? Caprioli. And Alessia Pasquale. I hope it's written.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Correct.
Sorry.
I worship.
The second session, no, that's fine. The second day of our workshop will take place at the British Museum within the Department of Greece in Rome. And for reasons of security and space, particularly because the objects will be presented in the study room, it is all open only to participants, and sorry for those who will not be able to join. Since we will be at the museum, we will focus on the history of collection and the museography of Canosan objects, notably so with my own contribution about the history of collection related to Canosa in our department, and with our Italian colleagues from the museums of Apulia, Anita Rocco and Luca Mercuri. And the final study session will be held in close proximity to the objects themselves, focusing on glass with Daniela Costanzo, and on the questions of polychromy in South Italian and Greek vases with Francesca Silvestrelli and my colleague curator in charge of our Greek vases collection, Alexandra Filling. To conclude this brief introduction with Giusy, we would like to remind speakers to please respect the allotted 20 minutes so as not to create too many delays. Giusy were not respecting, so but I will be there like 5 minutes. And 5 minutes. I mean, but David will do it. And without further ado, I would like to invite another of my colleagues from the Department of Greece and Rome, David Sanders, curator for the Greek word, to chair the first two sessions of our workshop. A few words about David, if you don't know him. Before arriving in our department this year, David has been associate curator of the Department of Antiquities at the Getty Museum. And he's also a great specialist of South Italian vase painting, and especially about what we can call the underworld or display vases. He has also developed research into the history of vases restoration in 19th century Naples. He worked on Gargiulo, for example. And if you are in the field of South Italian archaeology, you all probably know a project and exhibition he developed a few years ago between the Getty and Berlin with Ursula Kastner, called Dangerous Perfection, Funerary Vases from Southern Italy. So please join us to welcome David to start our workshop.
The questions after everybody.
Yeah, we can allow some 5 minutes of questions. That's why you have to respect the 20 minutes.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Kristen. I'm literally just introducing the speakers. But on a personal note, and I think on behalf of all of my colleagues at the British Museum, I'd like to say what a pleasure it's been to welcome Giusy here in London and to support her and help her with her work. It's been really great to initiate these conversations, and to thank both her and Christian for organising this session. And I think as we think about future redisplay of our collections, which I'm sure if you haven't heard about, you will hear about in the days to come, the opportunity to think and look more closely at our Canosan material and to really bring it out of the shadows in some ways and to really highlight its richness and complexity for the future is really, really exciting and compelling. It falls on me to introduce our patron goddess for today. Professor Garletta is Associate Professor of Classical Archaeology at the University of Bari Aldo Moro, where she's taught since 2006. She holds a PhD in Archaeology of Magna Grecia from the University of Naples Federico II and a specialization in Classical Archaeology from the University of Bari. Judy's research focuses on the archaeology and visual culture of ancient southern Italy and the Mediterranean, particularly Apulian red figure pottery, funerary painting, and the relationship between images, archaeological contexts, and cultural practices. She has participated in numerous national and international research projects, and as I'm sure many of you know, is the author of several scholarly publications, not least volumes on the Tomba delle Danzatrici, Ruvo, and the CVA from the Museology in Ruvo. As you've heard, Professor Garletta is currently the A.D. Trendle Fellow here at the ICS, where she was carrying out her research project entitled Mix and Match in Pottery Production of Canosa between the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE. And today she'll speak to us about Canosan pottery and painting, offering an overview of cultural and archaeological context that over the past few weeks she has begun to explore through the Canosan materials present here in London. And her title is Polychrome Afterlives, Canosan Pottery and Painting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, David, for your kind introduction. And I'll start soon with my talk on Canosan pottery and painting at the core of my mix and match research project, focusing on ceramic production from the late 4th century BC onwards in Canosan Puglia, ancient Canosium, which was an important key center in the Otranto region in Italy. As a Trendle Fellow, I would like to begin by acknowledging Arthur de Trendle, who in his studies on Apulian red figure glass painting first proposed a Greek-type red figure production in Canosa, identifying the Lampas painter and group, active in the mid-4th century BC. Trendle observed that this painter was a painter of a considerable originality both in style and subject, and since most of these vases come from Canosa, he said, he wrote, he may well have had here his workshop. This hypothesis is now largely confirmed. Over 100 vases are attributed to the Lampas group with a coherent stylistic characteristic. This development is rooted in the long history of Damian ceramic production. From the early Iron Age onwards, it features chromatic sensibility, a preference for plastic decoration, and a repertoire of vessel shapes closely linked to ritual practice. Imported ceramics, first Ionic West and later Attic and South Italian productions, are integrated into local frameworks. But a shift occurs around the mid-4th century BCE. And the key context for this transformation is the Varese tomb complex, where we first observe how Daunian identity and Tarentine pictorial traditions interact within a single assemblage, producing new solutions in shapes and in iconography. In the chambers 1 and 2, at least 2 burials can be identified, belonging to the earliest phase of the complex. For the first burial, probably female, the workshop of Varese painter produced vases that introduced significant innovations in imagery, including this large amphora with the mourning niobbe, flanked by 2 spatially shaped amphorae, so-called type 1 lutrophoroi, a vessel shape that becomes codified within this workshop, both materially and iconographically. And the same vessel type also appears on a second vase, the Idria, by the same painter and from the same assemblage, where similar amphorae are placed above an aiskos containing two women. And their garments display the striking use of color already noted by Trenda for this painter. And for this painter too, based on provenance and the material features, several scholars have proposed it possible, at least the temporary localization of his activity in northern Apulia. So the Lampas painter apprenticeship should be understood within this horizon, where interaction between the external painters and the Daunian tradition become embedded in the local production. Its local preference is evident in small vessel types, the single-handled juglets, the Oinokuai type 8N, and the leaded Oinokuai type 8B. These V-shapes echo traditional jugs and are likely linked to specific ritual functions involving storage or handling of solid and liquid food. Rather than deriving from a Greek repertoire, they belong to a local functional system aligned with the so-called listata web. This is a different ceramic class, largely defined through the assemblages of the Varese tomb that appears to derive directly from early geometric tradition, preserving two dominant vessel types linked to the long-standing agro-pastoral ritual practice in this region. The shapes are the globular ascos and the olla with a wide funnel-shaped rim. Both belong to the first phase of the so-called listata, the banded web, dated to the mid to late 4th century BCE. And both vessel types appear closely connected with the use of liquid or solid food in local ritual practices, as already suggested by their depiction on early Daunian stelae. But on the other hand, what is okay. The repertoire introduced by Varese painter left a mark on subsequent late Apulian Rapide production, beginning with these direct followers, including the painters of the two Idria in the center and on the right from the same context, possibly belonging to a slightly later female burial in the same tomb. And this story continues in the workshop of the Baltimore and White Saccos painters and their numerous followers. Over 7 right figure vases from Daunia have been attributed to this workshop, about half of them from Canosan, Apulia. Within this repertoire, the Brut crater is only a monumental vessel used to represent the deceased within the Naiscos, often alongside offerings before a step. However, the newly introduced base shapes proved popular in northern Apulian market. As Francesca Silvestrelli observed some years ago, the Canosan workshop of the Baltimore painter is credited with the introduction of the type 3 Lutrophoros, this version also known as barrel amphora without the handles, a shape closely associated with this area, even if context remains poorly documented. And also favored are the cylindrical pyxides that are absent from the early South Italian repertoire. The one on the left is a pyxis from the Varese tomb, and the one on the right is a pyxis in the British Museum with the usual temple, Bari provenance. The lid appears the Gorgonion in relief, painted white with the yellow curly hair, like the upright medallions commonly found on bullet crackers by Baltimore people. And this is another preferred shape imitating the metal podanicter. On the right, we have a large example in the British Museum, and the one on the left is a celebrated late piece from the same workshop with Andromeda and Niobe, that are two mythological subjects very favored in the local funerary sphere. Also derived from metal prototypes are the cantoroi, and we have a large number of cantoroi in the later Varese tomb assemblages. And the pilgrim flask is a unique red figure example from the same workshop, but also in the latest phase of Listata wear. And the monks continue the success in a later Apulian, usually with generic motifs, but occasionally, as in this case, a small mug by the Baltimore painter carries a mythological scene, Heracles staining the marriage of Diomedes, and the same subject was painted by the same master, the master painter, on this type 1 oinokoe, another locally favored form. But on this shape, okay, certain motifs become standardized, most notably the frontal winged female head and Nike in a chariot, a theme of particular interest today for reasons that will become clear a few later. Within this production milieu, a new palette of colors transforms painted ceramics. Bright red and pink, applied after firing, appear in Listata pottery, marking the transition to the phase 2 at the beginning of the 3rd century BCE. And at the same time, surprisingly, new post-firing colors also appear on red figure pottery. Applied to the handles of cantoroi, lead knots, also lutrophoroi lead knots, and rims and plastic mats of type 1 oinokoe, highlighting key morphological features. Another case, the Polychrome decoration is on the Scylla-skoi, so-called Scylla-skoi, on the monster surmounted with a wine-skin shaped skoi, or the Polychrome decoration is on the head that replaces the body of the vessels, like this type 1 oinokoe, head oinokoe. We are now, I believe, in the early decades of the 3rd century BCE, a period of renewal of the artistic language in both architecture and painting, the decoration, mural and ceramic alike. It responds to the demand of a wealthy and culturally ambitious patronage, open to Hellenization and already allied with Rome, requiring the monumental expansion. This is a slide for the particular historical moment of this region. This patronage required the monumental expansion of a small number of elite tomb complexes used over generations, and among them there is also the Varese tomb. It is during this phase that the entrance facade of chambers 3 and 3 to 5 was enriched with painted colors highlighting the moldings carved into the rock. And grave assemblages become dominated by vessels executed entirely in the new technique, the plastic and polychrome vases of Canosan. Unlike listata and red figure pottery, where polychrome additions were applied onto an already fired surface, here the entire pictorial process takes place after firing. The surface was covered with a whitish gypsum-based layer, onto which finely ground pigments mixed with organic binders were then applied. Alessia Pasquale will later discuss the colors, the most striking of which are pink and red, but we use that are different from the fuchsia pink of harpy vases and from the brick red tones of Ordona vases. And Linda Caprioli will provide later further details on the repertoire of vessel shapes and the questions it raises. Here, however, I would like to briefly show this chart highlighting the clear dominance of locally inspired forms. We can see the strong persistence of the ritual practice in the three most numerous categories, which are identity defining for Canosa: ascoi, head bases, and the funnel ring vases. I show them rapidly. So here we have the Scilla ascoi, and then this globular vessel with a single spout, the same shape in the same period attested in the Lissata well. And even more numerous are these three spouted variants of globular or ovoid vessels, attested in the second phase of the Listata pottery. This sequence, I think, may provide a useful chronological indicator for our polychrome ceramic. I would suggest that this form may underlie the essential construction scheme of many Canosa LPs. Many of the head vases transform the oinokoe container into heads. But those more characteristic of Canosan production instead develop the front part of the three-spouted vessel, the so-called three-spouted ascoi, globular ascoi, into a human form, further hybridized by the addition of an oinokoe handle, which does not function as a handle but as a support for the figuring placed above the vessel. It is as if the vessel had lost its practical function and its bodily form in favor of a purely symbolic value, reinforced by the plastic modeling of the enigmatic heads that have long attracted scholarly attention. But what destination could we imagine for such objects beyond the ritual display and brief yet ritual but yet real performative use during burial, given their unstable and fragile construction, perishable decoration, and the frequent absence of both base and mouth? I will now present a sequence of images comparing polychrome ceramics with analogous examples in other ceramic class with brief comments. So we can see the pixie dust, the cylindrical pixie dust, where the shape and the mold of the lid is the same from red figure to plastic and polychrome Canosan. Tomorrow we will examine this large example in the British Museum, comparable to the one from the Canosa tomb, bottom left, which the one in the British Museum preserves traces of color on the interior, on the interior of the lid and the interior of the bowl, And affinity between oinokoi across different ceramic classes evident both in modeling and iconography. And so also for the pilgrim flask, where that in plastic and polychrome production is very numerous and shares modes with the pixeler slates. And unless Lutroforos continues its success with numerous examples in tempera, and the profile of Cantarol in the two techniques is identical. But the centrality in the ritual practices is emphasized for the ascoi and the fan vases by the addition of impressive plastic decoration such as Scylla, monsters, wind figures, and women carrying offerings. Gorgoneon masks turn their gaze outward, while from the vessel's walls emerge horses, art horses, and they are fragile appliques, often found touched and preserved separately. And Christian and I found many detached appliques in the stores of the British Museum. And we should not overlook the most iconic feature of traditional Damian vases. The single, and this is the single-handed version of the funnel vase, often decorated by adding a strip onto which plastic figures were mounted and fixed through small holes. The figures were filed separately on matching vessel wall segments, which also bore strips and perforations, as you can see in this example in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, with the incised letters, perhaps instruction for assembly. We should therefore interpret in this way the vessels without with the only strip and numerous appliques without the vessels we can find in the room 73 of the British Museum, in the storage of the British Museum, and in many other museums. A plastic applique also decorated the two-handled version of the funnel vessel, sometimes classified as craters due to the addition of plastic handles extending up to and connected with the rim. So finally, I have to address some questions about the bullet crater, the polychrome bullet crater, because we know a handful of examples, mostly known through the antiquities market with the generic indication of provenance or production in Canosan. Are these vessels truly Canosan? And how can they be distinguished from the craters of Arpi and from Ortona? And how can we explain their rarity? I have an idea, because the shape does not appear to play a major role in ritual practices within Damian assemblages, unlike the types discussed so far. Some examples suggest local production in the painted imagery. The scenes closely parallel those found above Canosa, on Canosan Oinokoi. And this brings us to the final point of my talk. A few observations on the shared visual horizon on Canosan pottery and painting in this crucial moment. Compared with the rich repertoire of figure pottery produced in Paris, the red figure pottery, the Canosan repertoire appears far more selective. only a limited number of themes are retained, chosen for their relevance in the funerary sphere, for which these vessels were primarily intended. The chariots, drawn by four horses, guided and preceded by winged figures, emerge as a preferred subject. Tomorrow we will take a close look at this example in the British Museum, and on the secondary side, better preserved, there is the recurring motif of the hippocamp, the hybrid creature with the horse's forepart and the serpentine body. Together with dolphins, a well-known symbol passage to the afterlife, this creature is among the most frequently represented motifs in painted vase decoration of this period. But at the same time, it is also in the decoration of the facades of the tombs, where it carries a comparable meaning. We have an evidence in the painted facade of the Santa Loia tomb, now in Canosan Museum, because we can see traces of the tail of such a monstrous creature in the pediment above the doorway. And in the upper part, on the right, a pair of young women beside a horse. By comparison with the side chamber of the contemporary Cerberus tomb, this may be reconstructed as a scene of the deceased's introduction into the afterlife, led by Hermes, and the Cerberus is in the center of the composition. A similar scene also decorated the upper part of the facade of the tomb's cochera, whose assemblage included significant Canosan plastic and polychrome vessels. It will be extremely interesting to undertake a comparative analysis of pigments across different media, stone and ceramics alike. This would allow us to move beyond photography and better understand both the organizational complexity of this city and the shared artisanal knowledge. As Christian said, scientific analysis on pigments from Canosan vessels in the British Museum have identified dyes such as meadow lake also used in textile production, suggesting a circulation of materials, of skills, and perhaps artisans across different domains. We might imagine that these same colors also animated garments actually worn by mourning women participating into ritual performance. The gestures are reflected both in painted imagery and in plastic figures inhabiting and activating the tomb space, such as the so-called orantes of Canosa, as well as vessels or mounts. Painting the sculpted figures do not simply depict ritual, they echo, extend, and restage the ritual. Image and practice, object and rite become deeply intertwined, moving between the body of participants, the walls, faces, the chamber space, and the artifacts. Under the gaze of Gorgons and enigmatic female figures emerging from this vessel, the journey of the deceased is not only narrated but continually reenacted. It unfolds, in conclusion, within what we might describe as a fully immersive polychrome transition to the afterlife. Thank you for listening.
Marcella Leone is a CNRS research engineer, archaeologist, and ceramics specialist at the Centre Jean Bérard in Naples. Her research focuses on ceramic assemblages, combining typological and chronological analysis with interpretation and publication of archaeological context, particularly in funerary and Hellenistic settings. From 2013, she contributed to the research program on the necropolis of Cumae, and since 2014, she's been actively involved in the ARPI project, an interdisciplinary initiative dedicated to the investigation of the ancient Daunian and Hellenistic city of Arpi. Within this framework, she is responsible for the study and reinterpretation of materials from earlier excavations conducted by the Soprintendenza of Foggia, with particular attention to ceramic production and circulation, and her paper is titled Arpi, Forms and Colours of an Italian City.
Oh, yeah, I mean, since Marcella really, so she's not been able to come because she's actually doing some excavations in Kuma, and there was no one for replacing her. But she sent us her text, and so for the effort that she did, we wanted to present it. But I will not be able to answer any question. But we will try to discuss. Anyway, the organizer, I would like, first of all, to extend my heartfelt thanks to Giusy Gadaletta for inviting the Centre Jean Bérat to take part of this extremely interesting workshop. Thank you, Marcia. I'm truly sorry that I cannot be with you in person today, as my research is currently keeping me busy at the excavation site of Kuma. However, it is with great pleasure that I'm joining you virtually, passing from the necropolis of Kuma to the necropolis of another great site of southern Italy, Arpi. This conference provides an opportunity to present following the work carried out by Marina Mazzei, and thanks to the updated data compiled as part of the Arpi project led by the San Jean Bérat and conducted in collaboration with the University of Salerno and the Soprintendenza di Foggia, under the direction of Priscilla Munzi, Claude Pousadou, and Alfonso Santoriello, some observation of the composition and evolution of the Arpi pottery culture between the 4th and 2nd centuries BC. Despite the irreversible damage caused by illegal excavations at the Arpi necropolises, the synthesis of previously published data and the study of unpublished finds have made it possible to reconstruct a picture of the distribution, production, and use of tempera pottery at Arpi, and to evaluate its role in reconstructing the cultural and artisanal history of one of the two largest Italian trolleyes. Arpi was a wealthy city located in the center of an alluvial plain that was crossed by several rivers and streams, halfway between the sub-Apennine barrier to the west and the Adriatic Sea to the east. During the 6th century BC, the settlement featured a crescent-shaped rampart next to the Cellone River, enclosing an area of approximately 1,000 hectares. From the end of the 4th century to the end of 2nd century BC, Arpi and Canosa were considered to be the largest, the richest, and most populous cities in Daunia. Arpi witnessed artistic and artisanal transformation that accompanied the cultural, economic, and social evolution of this Daunian population in its interaction with other Greek, Samnite, and Roman communities. The settlement's location, its cultural contacts, and historical trajectory have had a profound influence on the city's artisanal production. From the middle of the 4th century BC, potters at Arpi experimented with new techniques for decorating their ceramics ware. For the site of Arpi, the examination of pottery, generally defined as a crudo, fresco a fresco, or tempera a tempera, proved to be highly complex. It is frequently subject to the misleading expression Canosan type or Canosan pottery, which directly references the vases found in the Epogea of Canosa. However, the latter presents stylistic characteristics that are very different from the pottery identified at Arpi. Over time, these terms have encompassed various productions that are not always coeval, but which are all characterized by decoration applied after firing and without further heat treatment. In this context, it has been decided to use the term tempera and to characterize the pieces from time to time based on the background color of the decoration. Before presenting various types of production, I must make a brief digression regarding terminology. Even today in the literature, and I'm referring primarily to Italian sources, though the problem arises in other languages as well, there is no uniformity in definitions. As previously stated, the polychrome tempera class is almost always defined as Canosan or Canosan type, which oversimplifies the questions of production and provenance. The various types of pottery are not always clearly defined, except from dorata pottery, the golden pottery. Although the term dorata, gilded, is misleading, particularly when compared to Greek production. I would therefore like to propose a set of terms here based on the pottery identified at the RP site, which are likely applicable to the whole of Donia. We can identify, is it later? No. We can identify the following productions: the gilded pottery, la ceramica dorata, white ground pottery, or which with over the paint tempera decoration, ceramica fondo bianco and ceramica fondo bianco con decorazione sovradipinta a tempera, black ground pottery, ceramica fondo nero, black ground pottery with over the painting tempera decoration, ceramica fondo nero con decorazione sovradipinta a tempera, red glazed pottery with over the painting tempera decoration. I will stop here. Pink ground or white ground pottery with figured tempera decoration. The so-called dorata pottery, gilded pottery, produced from the middle of the 4th century onwards at sites in southern Donia, is attested at Arpi from the final decades of the 4th century BC. It takes its name from the intense ochre yellow color that uniformly covers the surface of the vases, aiming to imitate bronze or gilded bronze vessels. Local production is characterized by overpainted tempera decoration featuring geometric or phytomorphic motifs, executed in white, red, and black. At Arpi, the forms produced are limited with the presence of dishes, onokowai, olpai, and kantaroi being documented. In the Arpi funerary context, these vases usually form small drinking sets consisting of 2 or 3 pieces at most, and this type of pottery does not appear to have been produced after the early 3rd century BC. White ground pottery, either plain or with overpainting tempera decoration, I'm discovering the text also at the same time. So it's made in the last quarter of the 4th century BC. White ground pottery it began to appear in burial context at Arpi, and using this technique, an incredible variety of vases was produced in all sizes and shapes. It is interesting to note that this type of pottery is not found in combination with other classes, but is uniquely found in grave goods consisting exclusively of white ground vases. This is the case with Tom 6 from the superintendent's excavation, the Safab excavation. I don't know what it is. I imagine the excavation from the superintendent. And the tomb known as the White Tomb, which was investigated in 2012. Imagine that it comes from the discovery of a white faces. The letter in particular contained around 60 vases with white ground. The pottery is commonly regarded as a cheaper alternative to silver vessels, but this interpretation arguably needs to be reconsidered. It is more likely that in Donia, the potters were seeking instead to imitate the marble and alabaster vessels placed in aristocratic tombs. Even the pottery with a white engobe should be regarded as copies of the marble vases, such as the vases on exhibit at the Museum of Ascoli Satriano. Probably at the beginning of the 3rd century BC, this production was enriched with temporal painting using pigments in shades of pinks, light blue, red, and black. The decoration is usually a phytomorphic or geometric type, and the motifs appear to have been inspired by a local tradition of monochromatic overpainted black glaze and geometric pottery. As research stands, this class remains one of the hardest to categorize because of the vase's condition. Nearly all significant examples survive only as fragments, complicating any reconstructions of their decorative schemes. The production of pyxides is particularly interesting, as they appear very different from those from Canosan. I believe that the British pyxid can also be attributed to the production of RP. So
I agree.
this one, but you will see tomorrow. The tempera painted vases that imitate black glaze the red figure ware and the black glazed pottery of the painted decoration known as Knakia pottery. Lack clear chronological context. Very few vases can be attributed to these categories, and they appear to be attested only in the region of Arpi, where the production workshop was likely located. This class is currently represented by only a few objects, and the context of provenance is known in only 2 cases. The first vase, now lost, was found, this one, was found in the tomb 25 of the Drago excavations, and the second fragment belonging to a crater support comes from the tomb of a throne, the chamber tomb, of the excavation of the Soprintendenza. The support is decorated with an extremely elegant floral frieze that echoes the racemes found on the necks of the masked craters vases in the red figure class. The only vase currently recorded as having a completely black tempera background is a lebes, previously mentioned by Marina Mazzei in her in an article of 1988, Note sulle ceramica polychroma di Arpi. The vase in question appears to have no known parallels, and its context of origins remains unknown. Very strange vase. In the case of black ground tempera pottery and its variants, the pigment used, likely carbon black, consistently shows poor adhesion to the ceramic body, making it extremely fragile. Because the color was probably applied without a binder, it poses significant challenges for conservation and restoration. From a technical point of view, standpoint, a red slip pottery with all the painted tempera decoration shares the closest affinity with red figure ware. The vessel recovered from Arpi corresponds to the 2 subgroups identified by Antonacci within the Sansoni collection. Red slip vessels with additional black layer onto which the tempera decoration is subsequently applied, and red slip vessels lacking this black layer. The tempera decoration is usually white, though pink, blue, and black are also used in some cases. Furthermore, it is not uncommon that for only one side of a vessel, to be decorated. These are the stratigraphics, blah 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 blah. No, there's an issue there. The former repertoire of Arpi draws directly on Apulian red figure pottery, consisting exclusively of large vessels such as volute craters or amphorae, and in total the necropolis of Arpi have yielded 9 vessels belonging to this group, so this overpainted tempera group, recovered from 6 different contexts. A comparison of this vessel with those from other sites in Daunia, particularly Ordona and San Severo, indicates that this production met the demands of local elites, who remained attached to the classical iconography expressed in a new style. The scenes draw on the iconographic heritage of the late Apulian period, from which they do not appear to deviate. Female heads, naiscoi with deceased, or funerary stellae with offerers inextricably linked this production to a well-established funerary narrative, leaving no doubt regarding the intended funerary purpose of these vessels. Establishing a precise chronology for this production remains highly challenging. At the present state of research, only 2 contexts provide a chronological indication: the stratigraphic sequence of tombs 9 and 10, investigated by Fernanda Tine Bertocchi in 1966, near the something that I can ONC 35 property, okay, near some property, and the comprehensive analysis of the grave goods from tomb 17 from the Soprintendenza excavations. For a detailed analysis, the reader is referred to the article co-authored with Claude Cusadou in the forthcoming volume, L'arte dei Dauni, edited by Riccardo De Cesare and Germano Zarcone. Overall, it can be stated that the vessels in question are attested from the middle of the 3rd century BC to the early 2nd century BC. Shortly before the mid-3rd century BC, tempera painted figured pottery appeared among grave goods. The vessels are characterized by the extensive use of rose, of pink for the background, and a palette of soft colors such as blue, red, yellow, green, white, and black. The decoration is usually applied over a white engo that was uniformly spread across the entire surface of the vessel, and the preparatory layer ensured a smooth surface and provided a more stable base for the tempera paint. Some pieces lacked the white and gold, leaving the natural color of the ceramic body to serve as an additional shade. This was observed on one of the two volute craters from Tube 82 at Groticella, identifying the area of the Medusa Hypogeum, where the painter made use of the color of clay for certain skin tones and for the coats of the horses. It is not uncommon for only one side of the vase to be painted with a pink background, and the secondary side have a simpler decoration here, or are not decorated. The form of the shapes found in this class are principally monumental vessels, predominantly volute craters, although smaller vessels are also attested, such as Deino, Oinokoei, Pyxitis, and plates. In most cases, these vessels were not non-functional, like in Canosan. They very often feature a hollow base, and in some examples, the supporting foot is detachable. In the latter case, the two parts of the vessel were joined via an interlocking system of held together by a cord threaded through holes pierced before the clay was fired. The addition of figurative appliques is rare on vessels produced at RP, appearing instead to be a characteristic of Canosan production, as Giusy showed you. These vases feature added plastic elements, which at present seems to be limited to plant motifs such as flowers and leaves. One example is this remarkable Deinos found in the Ganymede Hypogeum, which features a series of bell-shaped flowers painted in white, pink, red, and blue on its upper part. The context of provenance are exclusively tombs at Groticella and Mausoleum. It is particularly within this class that the Apulian red figure tradition finds its continuation. Indeed, these vessels are characterized by a complex figurative repertoire that, whilst lacking a direct counterpart in earlier Apulian production, evokes its complexity and intricate composition. Arpan production seems to favor exclusively battle scenes, which are entirely distinct both from contemporary tempera paintings produced at other sites in Daunia and from the late Apulian repertoire. An overview of the subjects depicted was first presented by Marina Mazzei in 1987, and she identified representations of the Amazonomachi as well as the generic battle scenes. The later are in turn divided into four series. First, the combat between foot soldiers and horsemen. Second, combat between two horsemen with a foot soldier in the center. Is it the next one? No. Third series, the combat between the fight between one or two pairs of warriors, and the fourth series, an isolated warrior. To this must be added the representation of Nike on the quadriga and winged heads. Is it? This new figurative repertoire seems to derive primarily from funerary wall paintings, of which the city of Diomedes provide important examples, such as the tomb of Nike. What immediately catches the eye is these battle scenes are always set against a pink background. This is a very deliberate choice of color. It would appear that this hue was specifically chosen to highlight battle scenes, and not just in Daunia. One need only think of the sarcophagus of the Amazons, Etruscan, or the shield bearing a Gorgoneion on a pink background from the Macedonian tomb of Agios Athanasios. I believe this color was inextricably linked to battle and victory won on the battlefield, as might be indicated by the Nike figures on quadrigas, which in some cases are painted against a pink background. In Daunia, this rule of a pink background for battle scenes is always observed, with the exception of one vase found on the antiquities market that she showed here, a white ground and flora featuring scenes of warrior across several registers. Personally, Marcella believes the vase in question is a fake, or rather that the vessel itself is original, but the figurative scene was painted in modern times, probably to make it more marketable. This practice is well documented among grave robbers in the Foggia area for vases in the geometric style. As with tempera painted pottery in general, one of the major problems to be addressed is chronological. At the current stage of research, it is impossible to establish a definite date for the start of production, owing to several reasons. The first is the reuse of tombs. The context in which these vessels were found contained multiple burials, a fact confirmed by the archaeological record. Very frequently, the Agroticella tombs contain at least 2 burials, and the practice of skeletal reduction is also attested. Where a secondary reduced burial is present, the skeletal remains and associated grave goods were concentrated in a corner of the tomb or placed in specially dug pits, either inside the chambers or in the drummers near the entrance. The prolonged use of chamber tombs is also confirmed by the restoration of their facades. A prime example is the so-called front tomb. Analysis using a portable microscope and multispectral imaging techniques. Okay. There's no, so I imagine it was this one first. Yeah. The prolonged use of chamber tombs is also confirmed by the restoration of their facade. An example is a prime example is the so-called front tomb, analysis using a portable microscope and multispectral imaging techniques, particularly visible induced luminescence and UV fluorescence, have clearly revealed at least 2 distinct layers of painting and 2 superimposed decoration. There was a mix between the slides. Looting and it's not indicated. Looting and illegal excavation further complicate the interpretation of this context. The intervention of looters and the subsequent dispersal of art and heritage across international museums is a situation repeatedly denounced by Marina Mazzei. The situation is particularly disheartening when one considers that out of 261 contexts examined, only a single intact tomb has yielded tempera painted figurative pottery. Despite the staggering losses suffered by the site of RP, largely due to illegal excavation, its shapes and colors have not faded. They can still be appreciated today, continuing to tell the story of the eclecticism and exuberance of one of the greatest Italic police in southern Italy. Yeah.
And it's a pleasure to introduce the third and I think final paper in this first session, Professor Maureen Carroll. Professor Carroll is Professor of Roman Archaeology at the University of York since 2020. After a career in the State Archaeological Services in Germany and also a previous position at the University of Sheffield. Her research interests encompass Roman burial practices, childhood and family studies, as well as funerary commemoration and the topic of dress and identity. Professor Carroll has directed excavations in Germany, Tunisia, Britain, and the Roman imperial estate at Bagnari in Puglia. She is the principal investigator for a 3-year AHRC-funded research project titled Seeing the Dead, New Insights into Roman Gypsum Burials in Yorkshire. But as regards Roman Italy, she has developed extensive research on votive religion and so-called fertility cults and the integration of women in religious life in Italy in the 4th to 1st centuries BCE. One of her more recent research projects, which she'll be talking to us about today, developed in 2023 and 24 thanks to the Liverhume Trust, has focused on dress and identity in early Roman southwest Italy during the 4th century BC. and her talk this afternoon is Colour, Dress, Bodily Adornment and Cultural Identity in Southern Italy.
Yeah.
So I developed an interest in this topic of tomb paintings because I worked for 7 years in Apulia. And on days off, we would go and visit museums, the most wonderful museums in the world, but also making trips to Campania and Basilicata. And that's where I was immediately attracted to tomb paintings, which I found had been published as catalogues, but had not been addressed as sources of information about dress and identity. So I took it upon myself to start exploring that, particularly because southern Italy, with its ethnic and cultural diversity, really lends itself to an exploration of the ways in which people express their self-perception through distinctive dress, particularly in the 4th century BC, when Rome is advancing. The indigenous peoples are asking themselves, who are we not, perhaps more importantly, and we have this sudden explosion of tomb paintings expressing exactly who they think they were. And it's my conclusion, this project I finished last year, is that we can't speak of national ethnic identities here, or I think we need to look at smaller communities. Because when we're looking at clothing and self-promotion, it is on a community level that we see this happening, rather than in the large collective identities that Greek and Roman authors often like, and sometimes modern scholars do. And it's important to look at clothing, because clothing is a non-verbal way of expressing who you are. You belong to a group and you dress the same, or you are not part of that group and you dress differently. And likewise, if suddenly you change what you're wearing, it's a part of a change in identity signaling. So in this paper, I want to focus on dress, color and identity, particularly in southwest Italy. I'm sorry, it's southwest mostly, not so much southeast. And I'm not talking about pottery, I'm talking about tomb painting. Although I have included the red figure pottery in my study, because you need to do that. But I'm going to make some comments on southeast Italy, on Apulia. You can see here on the map the area where most of these tombs come out. It's the purple area, but I want today to sort of do a little excursion to Apulia as well. Of the greatest importance are the funerary portraits appearing in the tombs of elites in Campania and Lucania from the mid-4th century. It makes us very much aware that clothing and color and motifs and patterns were extremely important, and textiles were great objects of status. We don't have many textiles from this period, apart from, for example, this wonderful embroidered tunic, one of several found in the 4th century in a warrior's tomb in Ordona. But the tombs and the vase paintings suggest that there's a wide variety of colors and decorations. I'm going to focus on female dress, as this always is far more interesting than male dress, take my word for it. It has the most variety and enables us to identify these small-scale communities. For male dress, colors and patterns and meanings, I refer you to a recent paper of mine. It is a challenge to determine what clothing was worn by women in Apulia in the 4th century due to limited visual evidence. Compared to southwest Italy, the painted tombs with figural scenes, and particularly those with women in them, are very limited. Edward Herring highlighted already in 2009 the invisibility of native women, as he called them, in Apulian imagery. We are, and this is an homage to you, Josie.
Thank you.
We are largely limited to this absolutely magnificent but strikingly small tomb painting. When I first saw it in the museum in Naples, I was so surprised. I thought it was much bigger, but it is just one of the best. And we can see women dancing, wearing cloaks of different colors, but their clothing is all very, very similar. They wear a tunic underneath a cloak, and underneath the cloak over the head is a tight-fitting cap large earrings and hair ornaments, perhaps the Jajapuli, not certain about that, but I would hesitate to label this clothing as Apulian. In fact, I would not, or presume that it was worn all over Apulia. It could be characteristic of Ruvo, where this vase was found, where this painting was found. A red figure Apulian column crater by the Sisyphus painter on the same slide here depicts a woman dressed somewhat similarly in a long patterned belted peplos-like tunic with a striped headband. This might correspond to what's seen in the Ruvo tomb. But a recent analysis of the clay of this vessel suggests that it was not made in the workshops of Greek Talentum, although that was presumed, but somewhere such as Ruvo or Canosa, where this local dress was perhaps more likely to be worn than on the Greek-settled Ionian coast. Equally, scenes of a procession and a returning warrior of the 4th century at Arpi show a woman in distinctive clothing, include an absolutely unique red turban-like headdress and large hoop earrings. Now this again may depict dress that is relevant to the female costume worn only in Arpi. There are many more, a few hundred more tomb paintings to choose from in contrast in the southwest of Italy. And the following represents a brief assessment of dress, color, and identity seen in images from Capua, Cumae, Nola, Sarno in Campania, and Paestum in Lucania. And these are the sites that I have included in my study. Let's start with Cumae. At Cumae, this was a Greek colony taken over by the Campanian forces in 421, later acquiring Roman citizenship without the vote in 338. We have two monumental chamber tombs depicting women and men in clothing from Cumae. You can see them both here. In one painting, a man and a woman are seated at a banquet with a servant behind them. In the other one, a woman is seated with a servant who brings her various objects. I also, because I could not understand some of the various layers of clothing here, decided in a very ham-fisted way to make this costume myself. And you can see my experimental archaeology. Actually, it was really worth it. And this was an Italian student of mine who just looked the part, I thought, modeling it. So what women here is an embellished belted tunic with a very broad yellow tunic, probably bronze on leather, a short red cape with black and white dot border, fastened with a bow fibula at the front, a striped turban headdress, leaving only little bits of the woman's hair on the temple and the ears, and this separate hip textile, as I call it, worn, draped over the belt. Now, to make a long story short, because I thought I had 30 minutes, but I have 20, I'm going to make this very short. There's more in my publication about this, but I think this is a wedding costume. I think this hip textile is something that not only expresses wealth, because all of the layers of textiles, but I note that in these scenes where the one on the left, for example, where the woman is being approached, she's holding a mirror. It's an important attribute. The servant girl is holding an eribolos containing oils or ointments and a calathos for wool. All of these are classic wedding presents that we see in red figure vase painting. And you can see some examples here, including the very ornate chairs that the bride sat on. And we can see one at the bottom on a lutrophoros in Matela. So these scenes appear on vessels that contain water for the bridal bath. It all actually makes a lot of sense. So I think we're looking at bridal preparation here with the man and the woman seated. I think we're looking at the banquet after the wedding. And the woman continues to wear this textile, not on her head as a veil, but over her hip. We can see something similar happening at nearby Capua. And here we have scenes of a single standing woman holding a dove, a mirror, a flower, or a box. Again, all of them attributes of the marriage ceremony, often assisted by an assistant. Now, you might say that this costume looks very similar to Cumae, but when you look at the headdress, and the headdresses are always the most revealing, we can see that it is similar but not the same. The colors are the same, but not arranged in the same way. So if we were to look at them here, you can see the differences. One is red and black, one is black and red, one looks like a turban, the other looks like various pieces of textiles pulled up and draped over the back of the neck. Whoops. Excuse me. So Capua, also an ally of Rome from 338, losing her independence, this assemblage of women in Capua indicates that there was great pride in the identity expressed through dressing in this most important of Campanian towns. Pardon? No, I'm moving on. Okay. Don't worry. This is the problem with stapling things together. Yeah. Further east lie the towns of Nola and San. That's where we're going now. Now, they're only situated 25 kilometers from each other, so you could say they really are truly neighbors at the foot of the Apennines. Both towns were allied with the Samnites before being taken by Rome. In Nola, as you can see here, this wonderful painting from the Museo Archeologico Nazionale in Napoli, the women wear a straight unbelted tunic, unlike the Capuan and the Cumaean women. And they have lots of different types of embellishment, different patterns, different motifs. And they also wear a short cape, which also has different motifs and patterns. And I wondered whether these textile colors and patterns were important markers of distinction, perhaps showing kinship, perhaps even belonging to certain families, as you still can find today in the Alps and the Balkans among modern populations, perhaps passed down through the family from mother to daughter. In women, women are dressed similarly, but not the same. A straight tunic without a belt, again, in different colors, a cape, but not decorated the way they are at Nola, and again, a large fibula, sometimes with what seems like two garments layered on top of each other. I was fascinated to know where the fibulae are actually located to hold these bits of clothing together, because when the cape is worn over the clothing, you can't see what's holding it together. So tomb assemblages such as this one from Sano Tomb 225 are important to show that the fibulae indeed fasten the garments at the shoulders. Although women from Nola and Sano don't wear headdresses because they are of lesser status, the headdresses of elite women from these two towns look similar, usually a red close-fitting cap, like a skull cap, with a veil over it in blue or white. It can be knotted at the back, or it can hang straight down the back of the neck, as in Nola. So they're similar again, but not identical. And those differences, we might say 2,000 and some years later, well, was that really so important? But for them it was, and they would have recognized that instantly. That's a woman from Nola, that's a woman from Sarno. Now, the site in southwest Italy that has the largest tomb assemblage of paintings is Paestum. They began to paint tombs there around 370, semi-chamber tombs, chest tombs, and chamber tombs, the very large one, around the city. Of roughly 1,000 tombs that have been found thus far, only between 80 or 100 were painted, so these are truly the elite. Now, I won't go into detail what the women are wearing, you can see that here, but by and large, it's a long tunic, rarely with a belt, and if the belt is there, it looks like it's made of cloth, not of bronze on leather. Different types of headdresses, type 1 and type 2, mostly like a turban, quite voluminous sometimes, knotted at the back, or worn almost with a diadem at the front. And sometimes over that they wear a cloak or a tunic, as you can see in the bottom two. So the colors are never unique. What we have here are red, yellow, blue, and especially red. Red is the most popular, but the decorations and the borders vary considerably, like in the other towns. What is unique, as far as I can tell, is this newly, well, it's 2 years old now, it's not that new. I went to see it but couldn't. I was very disappointed. Found in Ponte dating to the 4th century. Something unique is here, and that is the blue tunic of this warrior. And it's a wonderful spotted blue tunic I've never seen anywhere. It's the only one I know like this. So it must mean something very personal to this warrior, the wearer, the family, or the clan at this site. By the end of the 4th century, the emphasis on the elite warrior returning from battle with bloodied spoils to be welcomed by his wife diminish. Images of men engaging in battle, bloodied and injured, no longer appear. Instead, men begin to appear in civilian clothing, as here at Kumai, where the man, I think the bridegroom, sports a tunic with embellished borders over which an ornate cloak is worn. At Kapua, on the left, you can see a man dressed in very similar clothing, wearing also a large ring, which makes me wonder if this might have something to do with his status as a magistrate or something in government. Best exemplifying this change in identity signaling is a series of decorated chamber tombs in the Spinazzo cemetery at Paestum. Now, these date to around the time or shortly after Paestum became a Roman colony in 273 BC. And all of a sudden, men are wearing the toga. But look what they're wearing the toga with. They're wearing it with the highly ornate Paestum tunic underneath, the short tunic, with the broad belt. The toga is Roman, but everything else is local. So it's a really important time when things are pivotal, and the men wear long boots as well. They're almost always shown greeting each other as if they're elite members of society. It's on civilian behavior. It's no longer on war and bloodshed. In Paestum, in the late 4th and early 3rd centuries, female clothing also undergoes a change, albeit in a more subtle way. In the tomb paintings of this phase, the cloak as an occasional garment we saw earlier now takes on special importance, and it's prevalent in the imagery of the time. And white and red are the predominant colors. The women are shown sedately sitting or standing very quietly. The head is covered. They also shake hands. They mirror masculine behavior here. So I think what we have here is the situation of men and women of different generations and on the family. The family now becomes an important building block in Paestum society. This is the first of the Campanian Lucanian sites now where we have also the depiction of children. Before that, we didn't. So I think it's family and lineage all of a sudden that's important. The medium of funerary portraiture in painted tombs all but disappears in Campania and Lucania in the early 3rd century. If we look at later ones like this one here, again from Ponte Cagnano, from the second half of the 3rd century, this is a time when Ponte Cagnano had come under the control of Rome. In 268, a new town of Picentia was established. The woman here is represented in Hellenistic or Roman clothing, a chiton and a himation, no longer in ethnic clothing of the region, and her partner is dressed in a toga. There's no trace of a local or ethnic identity. This phenomenon is almost certainly tied to Rome gaining hegemony over southern Italy and establishing a new political order here. Clothing such as this represents and expresses this social transition from Italic to Roman. And we know this one because Judy introduced it. This is an absolutely magnificent recovered wall painting from Apulia. One would like to know where it came from. It was confiscated in 2023 in London. And I just draw your attention to the similarity of the clothing here. The chiton and the himation in the 3rd century, it's Greek, it's Koine, Hellenistic, Mediterranean. It is no longer something that's specific to Italic communities. So to conclude, it's apparent, and feast your eyes on this wonderful reconstruction done by a wonderful archaeological illustrator interested in ancient clothing who works out of Amsterdam. It's apparent in southwest Italy in the 4th century and the early 3rd century BC that dress behavior was gendered. The female clothing types consisted of distinctive multi-layered costumes and headdresses, but various colors and patterns also played a role, and they varied from community to community, even when those communities were neighbors from our perspective. Claims that women wore some kind of national costume, for example, a Campanian costume, a Lucanian costume, and a Apulian costume, which up until now is what you will read in most scholarly publications, are unfounded, and I think they're just wrong. It's clear that identities were formed and expressed on a relatively local rather than a large-scale national level. And it's predominantly women who are expressing these local identities, and this is not unusual. Also in the Roman period, I've worked on Roman costume on the frontiers, on the Rhine and the Danube, and it's exactly the same thing. And I remember going into a hotel bar in Sheffield years ago, and it was a big Somali wedding. And all of the Somali men were dressed in Western suits, and all of the Somali women were dressed in their costume. So it's a dichotomy that we still witness today. Women's costumes are more different and varied. Men's seem to be broadly similar. So I think it's interesting that it's women and girls through the 4th century who conservatively sustain and perpetuate traditional dress. And perhaps those dress identities are passed down maternally from grandmother to daughter to granddaughter and so on. The images painted for perpetuity on these tombs certainly indicate that women were the primary bearers of local identities in funerary representation and in life, and we should pay more attention to these small-scale communities rather than trying to shoehorn individual communities into larger ethnic units. Thank you very much.
Okay, everyone, welcome back. We, I guess, moved from tombs into even more shadowy areas with restorations and pastiches. It's a pleasure to introduce Hortense de Pelé. Hortense is a lecturer and conservator of cultural heritage, as well as a researcher for what they call the Conservation Restauration, ARC, in Neuchâtel, Switzerland, specializing in material studies and the history of restoration. Between 2007 and 2018, she was head of conservation at the Musée Ariane, the Swiss Museum of Ceramics and Glass. As a fellow of the Académie de France at Rome at the Medici in 2022-2023, she led the project Fashion Victims, ? Devoted to the practices of restoration and modification of ancient vases in 19th century Rome. She currently directs the research project Roma, Augusto Castellani and his collection, Restorers, Objects, Merchants and Archaeologists in Rome, which aims to approach historical restorations as an archival resource for documenting the history of collections. She is also collaborating with our department, particularly Christiane, for a new study on the Pinelli sarcophagus, but today she will focus on the history of the restoration of Canosan Ascoi, the title, Nearly Authentic Ascoi, ?
Thank you. So, in 2018, the Musée the Swiss Museum for Ceramics and Glass, devoted an exhibition to its founder, Gustave Revillot, who you see here against a beautiful pink background that I, of course, chose for the occasion. As a wealthy heir, Gustave Revillot built up through his life a collection covering a wide chronological and geographical range with a particular interest in ceramics. The collection included many ancient vases that he acquired on the antiquities market, and all were transferred in 1934 to the brand new Musée d'Art et d'Histoire de Genève, as the city decided to disperse its ancient collections in order to thematize its museums. The exhibition Gustave Revillot, Man Upon to the World, aimed to bring back into focus the encyclopedic character of this original collection. On the list of loans was therefore, as expected, a fine Canosan Ascos with plastic decoration. An object with an unknown provenance, of course, and attributed to create an excavation in 1862. So you guess that Revillot was not an expert. In any case, you can see here the vase as requested for the exhibition. Imagine our surprise when the Ascos arrived at the museum. The beautiful molded vase had turned not into a painting, but into an undecorated Ascos. Its supplied figure had disappeared, and the new appearance of the object was so different from what was expected that the curator wondered for a moment whether there had been a mistake in the loan request. In reality, the Ascos had been the subject of a study in the late 70s. The removal of the half-light figures had shown that they probably did not belong to the vase, and consequently they had not been put back onto the object. The result of the study had been published and presented at the Museerat as part of an exhibition with the promising title, Saving Art. So when Christian invited me to take part in this study day, I wanted to explore with you the conditions that led to such transformation in the image of the vase, as well as many others. Under what circumstances were this work modified, and why do we choose to remove these additions, and what are the consequences for the public? As the topic is broad, I have chosen today to focus on plastic and polychrome decorated ascot, although admittedly this example no longer quite fits that category. So let us consider the context in which the change took place, beginning with suspect number one, the 19th century restoration. At this time, as you know, restoration is not formed as a discipline, and restorers might also work in a wide range of other artisanal professions. Here, for example, you see an advertisement for Pietro Benelli, who is quite well known in London, I think. He worked not only as a restorer, but also as a painter, jeweler, antiquities dealer, forger, obviously, and less commonly noted as a wine merchant. Restorers were often trained within the family, as attested by this graffito published in 2018, found in the vase, Benelli Pietro Ragazzetto Piccolo 6 anni. It is thought that it was Pietro's grandfather, a restorer for Campana, who was looking after his grandson during his working days and allowed him to sign a vase. In most cases, the aim of the restorer's interventions is, of course, to ensure that the vase can be sold at the best possible price. This therefore implies that the vase is abundant and, if possible, complete. As a tribute to the place that will host tomorrow, I could not resist showing you this example from the temple collection, decorated with a Gorgonian that might be said to have a slightly lopsided appearance. This is an ideal transition to speak about the practices of our antiquary restorer. But thanks to preserved invoice and a few manuals, we know the rather limited range of materials available to the restorer for completing vases, materials that are often difficult to work with, I must say. Some of them, such as plaster, are available and easy to use, but are not always considered reliable in humid conditions. Moreover, plasters makes the object heavier and give it a different sound. By handling the vase and tapping its walls, the collector will understand that he's not dealing with an object in good condition. On the right, you have two bouquets at the same time, one of them restored, and you can appreciate the increase in weight caused by the restoration. Thus, to complete a vase, the restorer needs a material that is both strong and light. And for this, nothing is better than ceramics. It can be used in the form of a putty made with crushed ancient shells binded with glue. The resulting paste can be bottled or pressed into a mold if you want to recreate small relief elements. The restorer can also produce small replacement pieces in terracotta, which he can then attach to the vase. On Asco, he will be, for example, able to recreate important missing elements like arms or wings, or even all figure like on this horse. Even better, he can recover ancient fragments or figures similar to those that have disappeared, adapt them, and attach them to the base. Clearly, for Canosan figures, this solution is the simplest. After burial, excavation, and often rush transport, the plastic elements quickly became detached from the vases. So the scattered fragments therefore circulated widely and could be advantageously used to complete vases. These additions could concern small elements, as here, where the head of the character has been replaced by another, but more often they involved replacing one or several missing figures, whether they originally existed or not. In some cases, this also required preparing suitable supports onto which the new figures could then be glued, as you can see here. So from here, things get more complicated. Considering that these Ascoi are unique creations and that some already incorporate pre-existing figures at the moment of their creations, how can we know whether an applied figure was added by its maker or later during restoration? So let us look at the possibility for making a diagnosis based on a simple examination. And please do not be too enthusiastic because you will see that they are quite limited. As you know, the applied figures are made by pressing clay into a two-part mold and then individualized by the addition of model details. This means that the clay used for the production of the figure may differ from that of the base and may, for example, contain finer temper. Moreover, since they are not fired under the same conditions as the body of the object, the color of the figure may vary, as you can see on the right, with this example made from a Canosan clay, and you see the difference of color while the temperature changes. We can therefore conclude that the examination of the ceramic body of an applied figure can only rarely confirm that it belongs to a base. Next comes the questions of how those figures are attached to the body of the object. When this is done before firing, as on the left, it's easy to distinguish non-original elements for simple examination of the break lines. But the solutions becomes more complex since the practice of post-firing gluing is attested for this production. So how can one distinguish an ancient adhesive from a modern one? Let us recall that cold bonding is not a ceramic technique. A potter will only resort to it when faced with constraints of productivity or economy and when the object is not intended to be durable. In fact, gluing is not a reliable method of joining in humid conditions, and this was well known in antiquity since mechanical means were preferred for assembling ceramics. Gas chromatography analysis carried out on the Geneva and Bari collections agreed on the use in antiquity of a black color glue consisting of a conifer oleoresin mixed with natural wax for assembling Canosan figures. The very high level of degradation of the wax fractions is the element that led to this conclusion. It's indeed known that the ancients used wax resin mixtures for assembly, and an adhesive of this type has recently been identified in a coin from the tomb of the Lavaux prince in France. But the problem is that these adhesives are not specific to antiquity, as their use persisted until the early 20th century. Calcium casein, for example, which was identified in the Geneva Ascoy, was interpreted as potentially ancient. Yet casein glue was very widely used in the 19th century in Italy, and this is what Italians called colla di formaggio. It's a very cheap adhesive. Another difficulty is that these ancient adhesives cannot be identified through simple visual examination because many organic glues are prone to oxidation. They therefore turn a brown black color within a few decades. And the problem is that nothing looks more like a dark adhesive than another dark adhesive. So on the left you have an ancient wax resin mixture on the Canosan base, and on the right a 19th century animal glue on the Bouquereau. The two materials have nothing in common, but their appearance can be quite similar. There is difference in thickness, but believe me, they are very similar. It should also be borne in mind that most vases have undergone several restorations. So ancient joints may have been replaced by modern ones, which could lead us to wrongly exclude authentic figures because the adhesive has been changed. So you can see how things become increasingly complex. In any case, the simple examination of the adhesive used is of little help in attributing or de-attributing a figure. So can an examination of the surface help us? I suggest that we briefly return to the usual practices of our 19th century restoration. In most cases, once the base is glued back and completed, it proceeds to repaint and varnish it extensively. Here you can see that by repainting the entire surface, with the exceptions of the figure, which will be closely examined by connoisseurs, the restorer can save time, concealing both the alteration to the object and the modifications he has made. You can appreciate the effectiveness of the technique on this vase from the collection Faina in Orvieto, from which the overpainting has been partially removed. Very often, by unifying the surface of the object, the restorer has its personal touch. As you can see on this Bouquereau on the left, whose white motifs are clearly a modern addition, and on the right, another example from the Castellani collection in the Capitoline Museum. Unfortunately, for our restorer, this repainting practice does not produce excellent results on Canosan Ascoy because of the particular fragility of the polychrome layer made up of pigments or colorants bound with a simple vegetal gum. You can see here samples produced by my colleague Karine Bayol to characterize the behavior of this layer. This polychrome surface is, by its very nature, highly sensitive to abrasion and to water, as you can see here on these face plates, where drops of water were applied until they penetrated, and you see that there was a dissolution of the paint layer. So because of the fragility of this layer and the sediment solubility in water, it was, in my opinion, almost impossible to clean Canosan polychromy with the means and conditions in which the 19th century restorer worked. This implies that in many cases, the comparative study of the polychromy of the figures and the body of the vase is made impossible by surface abrasion resulting of earlier cleanings. Furthermore, because the surface is highly porous, it is extremely difficult to retouch it without the risk of creating a patchy effect. And this is what you see here. It's very, very nice. With these two overpainted objects whose surfaces have become very heterogeneous. I will not address the question of overpainting, as it will be discussed in the following presentation, but let us simply retain that faced with vases that are impossible to clean safely and difficult to retouch, the restorer naturally had a solution, and it's the miraculous wash of false sediments. It consists of a layer made from a mixture of earth and diluted glue applied to the surface in order to unify it and to conceal questionable restoration. In some cases, the layer may cover a substantial part of the base. Here you can see the details of the Jean Zéascos from the Louvre, which was covered with a layer of this type, and on the right you have the element after cleaning, which was dated as modern by thermoluminescence analysis. You therefore understand that this practice makes the visual distinction between original figures and later additions even more complex. So the Canosan vases from the antiquarian market are therefore often hybrid objects in which the proportion of what is original and what is not can be difficult to determine. As a result, any vase from an old collection becomes somewhat suspect, and one understands that the temptation is strong when conducting an authenticity study to proceed with a complete dismantling of the elements in order to facilitate their examination. Indeed, all studies converge toward an application of the polychromy after the figures have been set in place. So the shape and size of the negative left by a figure in the decorative layer therefore becomes a valuable diagnostic clue. Here you can clearly see this negative of the Gorgonian dismantled on the right, which allows its authenticity to be confirmed at the expense, of course, of the preservation of the presumed ancient ensemble. So this choice, in my view, presents a difficulty insofar as it assumes that understanding the object's original state takes precedence over the preservation of its 19th century condition. Yet, restoration do have an heritage value as they are shaped by the context in which they take place and by the history of reception. First of all, they often respond to a difficulty in accepting loss or incompleteness. I refer here to this caricature by Cham, produced when the Campana collection was first presented to the public in Paris. The Hospital of Disabled Statues humorously alludes to the military hospital of the same name, which treated wounded soldiers. The 19th century values completeness and symmetries in forms. These particular tastes encourages the replacement of missing elements that are assumed to be known precisely because they are symmetrical. Of course, these aesthetic considerations must be set in relation to the display context in which the restored vase was placed, an aesthetic of accumulations with objects positioned up and their details clearly visible. So in this context, silhouette takes precedence over decoration, and the completeness of forms can become a name in itself. Without entering the complex issues surrounding national identities, it is worth recalling that museums at the time are currently looking for objects from unfamiliar or regional material culture whose artistic identities were often valued in contrast to classical models. In a context where stylistic studies were still in their infancy, the restorer, which should be emphasized, does not decide on his own, could be tempted to introduce creative additions that reinforced or enhanced the presumed identity of the vase. In this respect, I would be inclined to compare the interventions carried out on Canosan productions and those applied to plastic Etruscan vases, which were collected but equally poorly understood at the time. Here you see an urn, originally without decoration, on which the restorer has added breathing problems and small ornaments. This pastiche is interesting in several respects. First, it restores neo-medieval imaginary, also found in this romantic vision of the tumulus of the Cucumella di Vulci, with its chimeras entirely shaped by the 19th century aesthetic. Secondly, it has parallels in other pastiches of this type scattered across the world, very likely produced in the same workshop. These pastiches tell us about the story of collecting and reception in much the same way as the reworked Canosan ascol. Indeed, while the deeper significance of Canosan vases was still a mystery to connoisseurs, their interest was drawn to vases distinguished by their profuse and baroque plastic composition. And this attraction naturally influenced restoration, not only in the additions of new figures, but also in their position. Here you see the forearm of the satyr from the Jean-Zéascos, as it was in the 19th century. On the right, after restoration, it became apparent that it has been mounted on the wrong arm. The chosen position initially enhanced the dynamic effect and even the sense of surprise of the figure, the baroque aspect of the vase. In this case, as in others, the dismantling of earlier additions, of course, allows for important corrections in terms of study, but it also entails the loss of the object's earlier stage in favor of another considered more valuable. However, the difficulty lies in the fact that the ancient state is, in many cases, only hypothetical. Canosan vases have undergone extensive modification and do not conform to codified typologies like their Greek counterparts. And we cannot rely on early drawings since they were generally produced after the object has been restored. So there is therefore a significant risk of presenting a new version that is no more authentic than the previous one. And I shall illustrate the complexity of the problem with an example that will conclude this presentation. Here you can see a Campana ascos in the Louvre, which has undergone at least 4 restorations and whose 19th century state is documented by a drawing by Charles Gélin and this photograph from the Rodin archives. As one figure had become detached, its latest restoration was decided upon in 2007. The in-depth study carried out at the Centre de Recherche et de Restauration des Musées de France made it possible to reliably rule out the mask and the central mourner. The bases of the lateral mourners made in the modern period had been placed on areas covered with polychromy, suggesting that these figures were not present in antiquity. So with an explicit intentions to preserve the 19th century state of the object, the decision was made to keep all the figures in place, but to remove the added support. So the lateral mourners are therefore now mounted on a structure that encircles the object. Certainly, the study provides additional authenticity for researchers as it highlights the ancient locations of the appliques shown here in dotted lines. But is the object still legible for the visitor? Is it capable of recognizing that, in this case, all the figures, with the exceptions of the center, are most likely 19th century additions? Admittedly, old restorations provide an image of the objects that often never existed in antiquity, but which is frequently the one known since its entry into a collection. However, new restorations with themselves generate a new, often hybrid image that carry their share of contradictions. These contradictions, in fact, emerge precisely here at the end of the restoration file. Indeed, noticing that the serpent, placed rather low in Rodin's photograph, had since been repositioned, most likely to fill the gap left by the missing triton, the conservators naturally wondered what should be done, and I therefore read the intervention report, which formulates this very interesting question. The serpent was placed after the photograph in Rodin's possession. Should the serpent be removed and the center put back in its place, assuming one can be found? So you can see here the questions being asked in 2007 are not very far from those faced by our 19th century historian. All of this, therefore, reminds us that our choices are above all human decisions, influenced by many parameters, among which, let us not forget, the history of tastes. So it would be illusory to believe that they will not be questioned by future generations. Let us therefore leave to our successor a few aspects still surrounded by the 19th century mystery.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we remain in similar waters. It's a pleasure to introduce Enrica Ropponi. Enrica is a PhD candidate in the National Doctoral Programme Mediterranean Archaeological, Historical, Architectural and Landscape Heritage at the University of Bari al Moro. Trained in Archaeology and Cultural Heritage Studies at Roma Tre University. Enrica's research focuses on Apulian pottery, combining archaeology, archaeometry, and experimental approaches to investigating ancient production techniques and the phenomenon of forgery. Her doctoral project, The Boundary Between Fake and Reproduction, an experimental archaeology project on Apulian pottery, explores how authentic and forged ceramics can be distinguished through the reconstruction of ancient manufacturing processes, diagnostic methods, and material analysis. And her talk is titled Overpainting, Pigment Analysis and Methodological Reflections on the Recognition of Forgeries in Apulian Red Figure Pottery.
Okay, good evening. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for giving me the opportunity to participate in this very interesting workshop. The reflection I will discuss today come from my ongoing PhD research project entitled The Border Between Fake and Authentic, an experimental archaeology project on Apulian pottery. The aim of this research it is propose a possible protocol or at least some guidelines for a humanities-based diagnostic approach that could become the basis for expertise on ceramic artifacts of uncertain provenance. The goal is to build a methodologic path capable, on the one hand, of recognizing the strategy of forgery and, on the other, of providing the knowledge useful for combating illicit activities. In this process, careful and detailed observation of the basis is fundamental. During these years of study, I have the opportunity to examine several examples from the storerooms of the Archaeological Museum of Canosan of Puglia, currently made available by Anita Rocco, where we are today.
She's come.
Yeah. Yes. Studying forgeries is important not only for recognizing fake objects or protection archaeological heritage, but also because the phenomenon of forgery itself reflects the historical, economic, and cultural value attributed to certain classes of ancient material. In the case of the Apulian pottery and Canosan pottery, the presence of fake mimetic restoration and modern reintegration represented how highly desired, collected, and traded these objects were over time. In other words, the fake indirectly tells us about the prestige of the original. Apulian red figure pottery, especially between the 18th and 19th century, became the object of strong antiquarian interest and entered the major European collecting circuits. Monumental shape, rich iconography, and high technical quality made this base particularly attractive on the antiquities market. As we have already seen, the same is true for Canosan polychrome pottery, which fascinated collector because of this exceptional character, vivid color, plastic application, architectural elements, and polychromy of that is extremely rare. in the Mediterranean world. Forgery, therefore, also arises from the desirability of the object itself. The really more prestigious and more requested an artifact is, the more likely is to be mutated, invisibly restored, or even repainted. From this point of view, forgery becomes the historical testimony of antiquarian testing, market dynamics, collecting practice, and even the aesthetics expectation of buyers. In many cases, forgers and restorers did not simply copy antiquity, but reproduce an idea of antiquity consistent with the taste of their own time. When undertaking a study like this, reconstructing the forger modus operandi is essential. The inevitable involves reason about the production method of ancient pottery, making comparison with authentic object fundamental. Every detail must be analyzed: shape, dimension, how the vase was wool thrown, and also how it was decorated. For this reason, stylistic analysis, iconography, colors, and painting techniques are essential in order to evaluate whether this element corresponds to ancient example. It's not by chance. It's not by chance that I use overpainting for the title of my presentation, because it can be understood in two very different ways. Let us begin with the first meaning, the one more familiar to scholars of South Italian red figure pottery. And after outlining the red figure, when the vase was partially dried, the painter applied the overpainted pigments used to define details, such as clothing, jewelry, vegetable elements. After their application, the vase was fired to wood burning and at the high temperature throughout a three-phase cycle: oxidizing, redizing, and reoxidizing. In the order to fix both the blood loss and the overpainted pigments. The most common colors were white, made from kaolin clays, red, made from iron-rich ochres, and yellow, also based on diluted ochres. Rare colors also exist, such as purple, sometimes resulting from a chromatic alteration, not always indeed by the painter. The pigments used for overpainter have a denser consistency that the clay-based paint used for contour and detail lines. After firing, a clear relief can often be perceived by touch, especially in the case of the white kaolinic pigments, and like this shown in this photograph. When I encounter a forgery, one of aspects of often pay attention to the presence of white overpainting lacking consistency, appearing extremely flat and diluted, and something more white. As in amphora shown in the photograph is a good example. In other cases, the pigments are completely unusually color tending toward gray or other tones, with no chromatic comparison to ancient example. For some of overpainted pigments observed during my research, samples have been taken for archaeometric analysis in order to understand their composition and how they differ from pigments used in antiquity. These analyses are still ongoing thanks to the collaboration with the Department of Chemistry of the University of Bari. As I mentioned before, however, overpainted can also have another meaning, literally painting over. Among the difficulties encountered in the study of forgeries is the presence of 19th century restoration, even restoration from early 20th century, before the establishment for conservation ethic and restoration theory as defined by Cesare Brandi. In the storerooms of the Museum of Canosan, I analyzed several large lithophory showing very bright pigments and excessively, glossy surface. At first glance, this piece could appear to be crude fakes, but in closer inspection, they provide to be authentic objects that have been badly restored. In this case, restored use Polaroid B72, an acrylic thermoplastic resin based to ethyl methacrylato, which contributes to variation in light reflection. When applied in excessive concentration, the resin creates accumulation that reflects light and alters the final chromatic appearance of the surface. Indeed, these lithophory display excessive shininess. In addition, pigments clearly not based on clay, iron, or ochre, unlike those usually found in authentic pottery, show fluorescence under ultraviolet light or UV light, as you can see in this photograph. In this case, the restorer choose the intervene on areas where the original pigments has faded over time, reconstruction the figure in a mimetic way. However, the mimetic effect was lost because the pigment used by the restorer underwent chromatic alteration over time. The black lines visible in the first image were retouched and under UV lights show red fluorescence. It was also possible to observe in the other vases from same private collection, the black lines has been retouched and extended. Under the microscope, the new lines, the new lines overlapping the original ones appear dark green, as previously observed under UV fluorescence. Among the retouches that were probably not completed in time was attempt to reconstruct the end of the figure, first scratched in a pencil before being overpainted again. In other situations, overpainting can be even more deceptive, as in the case of the return from the Yatta Museum of Louvre of Puglia. Forgery probably reconstructing using ancient fragment from an authentic cup. In this case, the forger not only reconstructed the shape, but also intervened in the painted decoration. Under UV light, this area shows particular fluorescence, indicating iconographic and pictorial retouching. In this image, it is possible to observe the reaction for the object under natural light and ultraviolet light. You can clearly see how modern pigments were used to repair certain areas and sometimes to integrate missing parts. For example, the flower completely changed color under wood lamps, and under the microscope, its line appeared retouched. The band decoration of the bust of Pan is also completely anomalous in terms of color, consistency, and reaction to UV light. The same applies to the egg and dart motif decorating the double register, which were either a did ex novo or overpainting, as visible under the microscope. The cases show how subtle the border between authenticity, restoration, and forgery can become. This ambiguity that makes an interdisciplinary approach necessary, combining direct observation, archaeometry, restoration history, stylistic analysis, and technological study of material. Indeed, a forgery is almost never identified through a single isolated element, but rather through a series of inconsistent emerging from the overall reading of the object. An overpainting that is too flat, an anomalous pigment, an unexpected fluorescence, or an excessively gloss surface taken individually may mean nothing. What is the relationship between these elements that create a suspicion? I would like to conclude my presentation by return to an idea mentioned at the beginning. Studying forgeries does not simply mean recognized deception. Every forgery begins with an object considered worthy of the being imitated. Thank you for attention and sorry for my bad English.
The third session we thought about with Juicy was to present the ongoing research that is done in her department, in her university, and in the University of Foggia, with both your young scholars, so Linda Caprioli and Alessia Pasquale, and Riccardo De Cesare, who will arrive because he just sent a message to Juice saying that he was in Buckingham Palace, so he's in London. You're gonna arrive in Victoria Station. It means that you will have a bit more time to present your research. But so I think normally we wanted to begin with Riccardo, but we will start with Linda Caprioli and Alessia Pasquale. So also maybe we can say a few words related to I mean there's a development of Canosan studies in these two universities, thanks to the Interateneo delle Università. So it's I don't know exactly what is an Interateneo, but it's something that links together the two universities and creates.
And the central site where it's
And the central site. So that's wonderful. It means that there is a renewal of studies on Canosa, thanks to young researchers too, with direct access to the storerooms, to the site, and so it's so important for the redevelopment of Canosan studies, and so we're so glad to welcome you to make this link between our 19th century collection, the 20th century excavations, and the 21st century new studies that will be developed here. Few words about Linda and Alessia. So Linda Caprioli and Alessia Pasquale are both graduates of the University of Bari under the supervision of Giuseppina Gardaleta, and currently enrolled in the second year of the Inter-University Specialization School of Archaeological Heritage. Both have already worked on topics related to the archaeology of Canosa, with a particular focus on the history of research. Linda has focused on the history of discovery and scholarship concerning Canosan fasces, offering also significant reflections on the complex and often problematic nomenclature used to define these highly distinctive artifacts. It's an important topic. And Alessia has studied painting tombs, exploring the relationship between architecture and painting in Taranto and Canosa. Indeed, we're all talking about Canosa, but one of the biggest sites of the region is Taranto. Let's keep it in mind. and likewise deepening aspects related to the history of archaeological research. So also as students of the specialization school, they actively participate in research activities, fieldwork, and this new enhancement of the region's cultural heritage. So today they represent together for one and the other for a talk called Forms and Colors in Canosan Vases, Research in Progress, introducing the main research questions they are currently developing and seeking to address within their specialization thesis. So you can go on.
Good evening and thank you for having us. Canosan polychrome and plastic ceramics are visually distinctive and striking, but they suffer from a lack of documentary evidence. The study of these artifacts is rendered extremely complex by a combination of factors. The difficulty in defining the ceramic class itself, the chromatic instability of the colors, the historical lack of interest in a category of object regarded primarily for their strangeness and mysteriousness, as well the uncertainty, or at least the apparent total absence of excavation data. To this picture are added the challenges related to illicit trafficking, museum dispersal, the scarcity of bibliographic resources, and the lack of a color photographic archive. The aim of our research is to better understand a field that is still not well organized, using morphological and color analysis to answer different research questions. The study is based on a sample of 127 bases. The selection focused mainly on objects with a non-archaeological context or with a clear connection to Canosan contest, as recorded in 1992 catalog Principi Imperatori Vescovi, edited by Professor Raffaella Cassano, together with the update research published in 2025.
Particular attention was given to the collection of the Museo Archeologico Nazionale di Canosa di Puglia and the Museo Archeologico Nazionale Iatta di Ruvo, where it was possible to study the materials directly thanks to a training internship. The collection of British Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museo du Louvre and the Museo di Santa Scholastica at Bari were also analyzed through the online documentation available. My interest in this production started because of the mysterious feeling that these vases seem to have. When I studied the problems connected to this class of pottery, I wanted to understand its origin better. I started to ask when and why this production was born and why it has such rich shapes and painting decoration, which make it very different from other types of pottery. One of the first goals of this research was to try to create a chronology for this class of pottery. This is not easy because the vases do not have a clear chronological system, and the few archaeological contexts that are not covered long periods of time. From these first ideas, many other questions appeared. These questions will be presented here, and if possible, answers in future research. One of the first points was to understand which vase forms really belong to Canosan production. Some vases are called Canosan only because they have painted decoration added, after firing or plastic decoration. Other forms are also common in Greek and Italian pottery, such as the Cantharos, Oinokoe, Lekythos, Epiphysis, Lutophoros, Phyxis, and Flesk. Together with these, there are forms more connected to local ritual traditions, such as olle, jugs with funnel-shaped rims, and especially ascoi, including the so-called Scylla ascoi. There are also hybrid forms that seem to be typical of Canosa, such as the Phyxis Lekythos. Some objects are difficult to call real vases because the vase body is replaced by the shape of female head. At the same time, these objects seem to slowly lose their original function. Some examples have openings similar to ascoi, while others have a ribbon handle or two necks. The research is based on so many questions. Can the study of vase forms help define the main characteristics of Canosan production and also show the differences from the production of Arpi and Ordona? According to Marisa Corrente, this production continued for a very long time. The archaeological context known today do not allow a clear internal chronology. For this reason, some important questions remain open. When did the production begin? When did it end? And how did it develop over time? The study of some contexts, such as the Varese tomb, show that some red figure vases are very similar in style and form to the polychrome ones. What is the relationship between these two classes, and what is the relationship between these local vases and banded pottery? Did one production come from the other? Did they exist together, or did they develop at the same time? Were they produced in the same workshop at the beginning? In 1992, during the exhibition Principi Imperatori Vescovi, Friederike van der Wielen, scholar who studied these materials most deeply, suggested that this production first came from the Greek world and was later changed locally. According to her, the production first focused more on plastic decoration and later became more pictorial. Is this idea correct, or should it be reconsidered? The research therefore begins with the study of base forms, with the goal of creating a classification system, which is still missing for this class of pottery. This is one of the main differences from red figure pottery, which has already been studied in detail. At the same time, the study of this form also tries to define the chronology of Canosan polychrome pottery and understand its relationship with red figure pottery and with other Daunian ceramic production dated between the 4th and 3rd century BC. It is also important to understand how the different vase forms developed over time and whether the same workshop produced vases using different techniques. This can only be done if we compare materials that have already been studied with others that still need more research.
Color is one of the most distinctive and spectacular features of the ceramic class and an essential part of the visual and communicative design of objects. A focus on color comes from the need to study these objects not only as decorated items, but as a complex systems in which material, color, plastic elements, and function all contribute to meaning. In this view, color is not only decorative, but also has a symbolic and perceptive value. It helps to define images and plastic details, guided how the object was seen, and increase its expressive impact. However, when studying polychromy and techniques, a clear level of standardization can be observed in both color and decoration. If we exclude the white preparatory layer, the most common colors are pink, red, blue, white, and black, used for drawing and outlining figures, with only a few additional colors, such as yellow, green, purple, and brown. This naturally leads to the question: starting from the observation of vases with mostly painterly decoration, why did potters feel the need to move away from or experiment with the established red figure technique to adopt new styles, while still keeping the shapes, layouts, and decorative roots of the older tradition? Furthermore, how and to what extent does this change reflect the wall painting of the same period? The class features two main decorative trends, one painterly and one more plastic. In the first case, the pieces show a clear connection in shape and imagery to red figure pottery. In the second, the painterly style gives way to the use of plastic elements, where color plays a secondary role, serving mainly to highlight the three-dimensional forms. Since current research does not yet allow us to establish a relative chronology, meaning a clear beginning and or intermediate phases, the debate on the nature of this transition remains open. Is it possible that these two trends coexisted at the same times, perhaps linked to different workshop patterns? Or are we looking at a chronological development where one stylistic features was gradually abandoned in favor of the other? If the latter is true, is it possible to identify intermediate phases that document this shift in decorative style? From the study of the sample, a clear result appears. Pink and red are the most common colors, making up the 61% of total. Scientific analysis show that this pigment is Madder Lake, a plant-based dye that was widely used, especially in textiles, to produce color from pink to red and violet. The research is enriched by an analysis of ancient Britain sources. This suggests that Mother Pink was seen as a shade of red, so much that in ancient languages there is no specific name for this color, which is often described simply as a red or as an alternative to Tyrian purple. This raises to several questions. How independent can we consider this color to be? When placed in relation to red, what was its function? Was it meant to highlight its brightness? And when related to purple, what social value did it convey? Given that dye was stabilized before application, its extraction required specific equipment, such as cauldrons for extraction and filters for precipitation, that was already well known at the time. How could this factor relate to the hypothesis of pink as a color of economy within a production quarter? If this were the case, would it be possible to argue that pink was the result of an integrated workshop economy, serving as an evidence of a skilled and pragmatic use of the local resources? How can comparisons with the other Daunian contexts, like Arpi and Ordona, or broader Mediterranean examples, such as the Centuri vases and the late phase Lipari painter in Sicily, and even the plastic vases produced in Athens during the 1st century BC, help us to understand if Canosan pink was a shared language among Hellenistic Mediterranean aristocracies used to signal that they belonged to the same cultural horizon? These questions are many and will likely remain open. For this reason, a critical rereading of the material is needed. This study does not aim to give final answer, but rather to identify possible direction for future research. It also seeks to free this production from a purely symbolic interpretation, or better, to redefine their main features from a morphological, technological, and economic point of view, in order to better understand the historical and cultural meaning. Thank you.
And now Riccardo Di Cesare, who arrived. Grazie Riccardo di essere qua, ce l'hai fatta. Allora, so a few words about Riccardo. Riccardo is a full professor of classical archaeology at the University of Foggia, where he teaches at the Department of Humanities, and so probably know him from his work at the Italian Archaeological School in Athens, and mainly his research focuses on Greek and Roman archaeology, but also architecture, ancient topography, ancient religion, the history of the sanctuary, the archaeology of the sacred, and funerary context. He directs the archaeological research also at Alba Vincennes, and oversees the study and publication of the Italian Archaeological School excavations at Efaistia, and also on the islands of Lemnos. He's also the director of this Interateneo between Foggia and Bari. Today he will introduce reflections on the theme of our workshop through the lens of Greek and South Italian archaeology, highlighting the productive connection established in recent years between universities and local institutions in the region, and presenting the research currently being carried out by students of the School of Specializations on the archaeological material from Canosa, and approach to both archaeological research and material evidence. So, Riccardo, it will be, yes, probably, but
I will explain.
You will explain that.
Yes, yes.
So, Riccardo, the stage is yours. Thank you
you,
for
Peter.
being there and for having run.
Good afternoon. Sorry for the delay, but it was due to the flight, and we are just in the reverse order because my task was to introduce Alex and Linda, but we changed it. But there is also a big change because Professor Gadareta just asked me to talk about Arpi, since it is a good term of comparison with between what we heard about pink Canosian color. So, I'm very pleased to be here in London at the Institute of Classical Studies for the workshop Polychrome Afterlives Reassessing Canosan Art, which represents an interesting international point of convergence among scholars on a theme, that of polychromy, which for several decades has been of great relevance in the study of the ancient world. Whether it concerns sculpture, architecture, wall painting, ceramics from the Greek and the Roman world, to the local cultures of ancient Italy, the subject of this workshop focuses specifically on Canosa. I am very pleased not only as a scholar of the ancient world, but also as director of this Interateneo school between the universities of Bari and Foggia, since this workshop is part of the context of the 2026 Stendhal Fellowship of the Institute of the Classical Studies, and is co-organized with the Department of Greece and Rome, the British Museum, Department of Ricerca Umanistica e Innovazione Umanistica at the University of Bari, and the School of Specializzazione. Furthermore, it takes place in collaboration with the Puglia Regional Directorate of National Museums, and we have here Dr. Anita Rocco, and the Fondazione Archeologica Canosina. Thanks therefore to Catherine Tempest, Crystal Mazet, and Giusy Gadaleta. The School of Specialization in Archaeological Heritage is a postgraduate advanced course after the master's degree, inter-university, between two universities which are strongly rooted in the territory of central northern Puglia, specifically ancient Peucetia and ancient Daunia. As is well known, Daunia and Peucetia are two regions of pre-Roman Italy which during the first millennium BC developed original settlement, artisanal and artistic cultures, which then progressively came into contact with the Roman world. Regarding ancient Donia, the northernmost part of Puglia, of which Canosa was part, of course, it developed an original artisanal and artistic culture, which from the transition from the final Bronze Age to the Iron Age, therefore between the 11th and 10th centuries BC, until late classical Hellenistic age, 1st centuries BC, was characterized by sculpture productions, terracottas and vases with peculiar characteristics, until the complete absorption of this culture into the Roman Tota Italia of the Augustan era. The specialization school, through the work of talented colleagues like from the school such as Giusy, and through close collaboration with the Puglia Regional Museum Directorate, here with Anita today, has initiated a re-examination of many problems of archaeology and art history of ancient Donia and Canosa in particular. These interventions touch now on funerary contexts, such as some of the hypogeia with their grave goods, now on aspects of Canosan artisanal and ceramic production, and we just heard the two students of the school talking about the Canosan pottery. We hope that over the years, this flowering of studies on Canosa by the school can continue to bring new knowledge to open problems and to provide new keys of interpretation and research paths. And I would also like to announce, as director of the specialization school, that the school offers its complete availability to host the proceedings of this workshop, of this meeting, in the school-owned editorial series, the Insule di Omedee, a series of historical archaeological studies of the universities of Bari and Foggia. You see here the last volume just printed, which is about ancient Daunia.
Prima devi sbloccare iPhone.
No. Sorry. As a framework, a reverse framework for interventions of Giusy and Alessia and Linda, I will structure my talk today in two main points. Some notes on the aesthetics of polychromy in the ancient world, Greece in particular, and secondly, polychromy in ancient Daunia with the particular case of Arpi. So I will begin just with some short remarks on Greek aesthetic thought, because thanks to the extension of the Greek world into southern Italy and Sicily, the Greeks were always privileged interlocutors of the populations of ancient Italy, starting with the Etruscans, the first Fidel Hellenes in history, but also the Donians and the other native population of ancient Italy. In Greek aesthetic thought, the beauty of an artifact did not reside exclusively in its technical and formal perfection, but in a quality defined as poikilia, deriving from the term poikilos, multicolored, variegated. This notion describes the visual effect produced by the combination of different colors, materials, and motifs, sometimes even with sharp contrasts between the various colors. From the ancient observer, poikilia was synonymous with a technical mastery, techne, capable of generating a polysensory seduction and a deep visual delight. Archaic literary sources from Homer to Pindar constantly celebrate poikiloi, that is, multicolored objects, as wonders to behold. Pindar, in particular, defines black figure amphoras as pampoikiloi, emphasizing how the complexity of the design and the chromatic contrast between the glossy black glaze and the orange clay were perceived as a form of visual richness opposed to the monotony of flat surface. This search for contrast and luminosity was not limited to ceramics. It manifested itself in inlaid armor on the chryselephantine statues, where gold and ivory were chosen for their ability to reflect light, simulating the vitality of the divine body. A central theme in the ancient aesthetics debate concerned the so-called tetrachromy. Pliny the Elder praises the great painters of the 4th century BC for having created immortal masterpieces using only 4 basic colors: white, yellow, red, and black. This restriction, however, was often an ethical and moral construction of later critics, who contrasted the sobriety of the classical masters with the colores floridi of the Roman era. Modern archaeometric analysis revealed a much richer reality. Ancient painters had a vast range of mineral and organic pigments and, through layering and mixing, created hundreds of tonal shades to imitate the vitality of flesh and chiaroscuro effects. And now let's go to Dania. Giussi has already illustrated here the peculiarities of Canosan polychromy, so my intervention will focus on Arpi, this big Daunian center that between the 4th and 3rd centuries BC represented one of the most lively and original laboratories for the reception of Greek models in southern Italy. In Arpi, the adoption of Macedonian decorative languages by local elites was not a passive imitation, but a conscious reworking aimed at reaffirming social status through the splendor of pottery, polychromy, and the luxury of imitation. The use of color in Daunia has ancient roots, already visible in the Daunian stele of the 8th, 6th centuries BC. These limestone sculptures were originally covered with a white lime wash, onto which orange, red, brick, and brown pigments were applied to highlight anatomical details, garments, and weapons. Later on, in the Hellenistic period, this old sensitivity shifted towards monumental architecture, where color became the common denominator between the space of the private home and that of the funerary hypogeum. An extraordinary example of this chromatic symphony is the House of the Lions and Panthers of Arpi, inspired by the palatial models of Pella and Vergina in Macedonia. Technically, the walls of these dwellings were made of raw earth, clay, and straw, covered by finely decorated plasters in structural style. Analysis have reconstructed a decorative sequence of great refinement, which you see now here. A gray blueprint surmounted by light orthostats and isodomic blocks that pictorially simulated precious marbles. In these environments, color was not just a surface, but defined the volumetric space. The funerary architecture of Arpi reflects the same scenographic ambition. The oldest example, dating back to the 4th century BC, is the Tomb of the Riders, a semi-chamber tomb painted on its interior with a funeral procession that runs from left to right. This tomb reflects, in its architectural and pictorial typology, models from Campania, fused with local tradition. On a preparation of thin white lime wash applied directly to the tufa blocks, the colors of the archaic tradition are used, red and black, together with shades of orange-red, brick and dark brown. The copious use of color does not only have a decorative function, but serves to herald the deceased and to exalt the higher rank of the elite patronage, making visible details such as the armor and the bronze belts of the riders, or the horses of the chariot carrying the deceased woman. You can see here each horse has a different color, like we find in ceramics. The Hypogeum of Medusa, first phase dating back to the 3rd century BC, it's just a little later than the other tomb, a chamber tomb that is influenced by Macedonian models in its tetra-style monumental facade, constitutes the reference point for understanding the relationship between polychromy and the ideology of the elites. The tetra-style facade with figured capitals has a pediment filled with a Medusa head in relief on a bright red background you see here at the left. Inside, the central room simulated the andron of the houses, with a floor mosaic of polychrome pebbles depicting dolphins and sea monsters that dialogued with the walls painted in zones and friezes of plant scrolls on a blue background. An exceptional document is represented by the painted pinax in the vestibule of the tomb, which bears the signature of Artos. This artist, a painter, a unique case in the Apulian world, signs his work using Greek letters to explain his activity. It is Artos, you can read Artos Pinave or Pinaios, so it's Latin Pinxit and Greek Egraphe, pois, Egraphs. So this painter, Artos, with his signature, claiming a social dignity comparable to that of the masters operating in contemporary mid-Republican Rome. The painting, in black and white on a red ochre background, shows the deceased with a groom and a horse rendered with a casual twist of the head and a technical skill that betrays knowledge of high-level models. Another example is the Hypogeum of the Nike, which marks the transition towards the Macedonian typology with a barrel vault. Its fresco tympanum shows a combat scene dominated by a winged Nike, where color is used with refined chiaroscuro effects to heroize the deceased. On a deep pink background, so the photo is a little strange, but there is a really pink here. Now it seems red, but it's pink in reality.
Okay.
On a deep pink background with the white borders, the scene comes alive with a rich palette. The horses are rendered in white and brown, with yellow tails and red bridles, while the warriors feature red flesh, blue helmets, brown or yellow footwear and garments that vary from grey-blue to purplish. The Nike, with white complexion, stands out for her blue wings with white feathers and pink chiton. Technical investigations have confirmed that the use of second layer of tempera with egg yolk as a binder, a technique that allowed for more translucent shades and very minute details. One of the most innovative aspects of the research conducted in Daunia by Marina Mazzei, a scholar of ancient Daunia, concerns the demonstration of the organic link between vase painters and tomb painters in Arpi. The Arpan workshops operated in a unified way, sharing techniques, pigments, and the same preparatory models or cartoons. The large polychrome mask craters of Arpi, often defunctionalized via holes in the bottom, with their painted scenes, were intended as true substitutes for wall paintings inside the burial. The technique was identical to wall painting. A white background served as a support for a very thin brush drawing onto which full-bodied masses of color and final overpaintings were applied. The battle scene and the Nike or the quadriga that adorn these vases faithfully reproduce the iconography of the tympana of the tombs of the Nike. The color palette was dominated by the purplish pink obtained from Mother Lake, associated with Egyptian blue, yellow ochre, and lead white. The discovery of fragments of crater in other tombs even revealed pictorial pentimenti, such as the change in position of the horse leg, you can see here and here in the apogeum with Nike, entirely analogous to those identified in the pediment of Nike, proving a circulation of iconographic models that crossed the boundaries of the support, integrating painting, ceramics, and mosaic into a coherent and unified visual language. In this context, local workshops developed also a specific class of white-coated polychrome vases that imitate marble vessels. These artifacts employed a coating based on gypsum or kaolinithi, often defined by scholars as white slip or shalbatura, applied after firing to simulate the surface of precious stone materials. Found in monumental contexts, like Archaeology, these vases did not have a practical function. They often have a perforated bottom, but were luxury furnishing and parade objects intended exclusively for the funeral rite, to respond to the desire for ostentation of local elites who could not access the expensive originals in Greek marble. The polychromy included the use of precious pigments such as Egyptian blue and pink lake derived from murex, the so-called purpurissimum, while witnessing the high economic value of this production. The conservation of this fragile heritage represents a crucial challenge today. The pioneering work of the archaeological superintendency, in particular of a highly valued restorers like Salvatore Patete you see in the photo, has allowed the recovery of over 80% of the frescoed surfaces of the house of the Lion and Panthers and of numerous pediments of the hypogea. Through the use of non-invasive methodologies, such as mechanical cleaning, it was possible to remove thick limestone incrustations without damaging the temporary paint layers, which are extremely sensitive to humidity and biodeteriogens. The future of research, one future of research, lies in the integration between aesthetics and archaeometric investigations, making it possible to identify pigments no longer visible to the naked eye. In this path of scientific renewal, the works of Linda and Alessia fits, which has been presented by them, and which concern a significant sample of polychrome bases. Through a systematic analysis of morphology and color, Capriola and Pasquale propose a new chronology and seek to better distinguish the productions of Canosa from those of Arpi and Ordona, and question the cultural meaning of color this aristocratic ink on a Mediterranean scale. In conclusion, the study of ancient polychromy in Daunia allows not only to recover essential data on workshops, productions, use of colors, but also to understand a complex system of meanings that made aristocratic power and identity visible. These paintings and this brightly colored Daunian ceramic continue to amaze museum visitors and observers today. They still have much to say to scholars and the general public. Thank you for your attention.